In this episode of the Omega Podcast, we have an esteemed guest, Adrienne O'Rourke, Manager, Nonprofit Consulting at Markham LLP. Keenan and Adrienne discuss the executive search process for C-suite executives, mental health and well-being. Let's dive in. Content warning. This podcast contains subject matter related to depression, suicide, and death.
Welcome to the Omega Expert Chat with Adrienne O'Rourke. Adrienne joined Markham's Search, Transition, and Planning team in June 2018 as a senior associate. She is now the manager on the team, focusing on identifying top candidates for national nonprofit executive searches. Previously, Adrienne worked as the Assistant Director, Employee Relations at the Kogod School of Business at American University for 3 years, connecting employers and students through on-campus recruiting, information sessions, and career fairs. In addition, throughout her time at American University, Adrienne earned her master's in organizational development. Adrienne, it is so great to have you on the podcast.
So nice to see you and talk to you, Keenan. And you should add to the bio that we work together at American University, and that's how we know each other.
Yes, it was such an incredible time working alongside you, making such a difference in students' lives at such an early stage in their career.
It was a wonderful experience. It's funny now I'm working on the other side with executives. So I've gotten to see really the full life cycle of someone starting their career and now really at the mid and higher level with the executives. But I do really enjoyed working with students at that experience. So great to see you.
Yes, absolutely. And just to get our conversation kickstarted, now that you're at Markham and you're doing a lot of executive searches, what are some specific qualities or leadership traits that stand out to you as you look for candidates or just in an ideal leadership position?
Wonderful question. So I'd say it starts from the person's materials. So we actually just asked for a resume and cover letter to apply. It's a pretty easy application process for our searches, which, by the way, are on a national level. A lot of them are in the Washington, D.C. area, just given the nonprofit sector in that space. But I'd say that the attention to detail, I actually had a cover letter this week, for example, that was filled with errors, and it just told me that that person really had not taken the time to review their materials before submitting them. We also receive a lot of transmittal cover letters, so folks that maybe really are just applying to multiple roles and not really thinking thoughtfully about each individual role. And then the nonprofit sector, I'd say that mission connection is number one. So why is this person interested in working for this position for another versus another organization? Do they have a personal connection? So, for example, I just started a search yesterday for the Hemophilia Federation of America. Does a person have a personal connection to that? Do they know someone in their family? We really want to hear that full story when we're reviewing their materials. But other great qualities are, yes, the mission connection, definitely their DEI equity lens. A lot of our clients are asking about that, how they've advanced that work in their space. Have they attended any trainings or certifications in order to advance that work? So that's really important. And I'd say the communication skills. So are they responding to my emails quickly to set up a call? Are they approachable and friendly on the call? Are their answers short and to the point? I also really admire concise answers, but I'd say that making sure that all of their experience overall is a great blend that really matches the job description, and that they've really taken the time to review the job description and thought about their actual application before submitting.
Yeah, that's really incredible that your team spends the time, the due diligence going through every resume, really peering and searching for those keywords that are able to showcase whether a candidate is best fit for a role. Because in a recent conversation I had with the CHRO of a bank here in Massachusetts, they're leveraging technology to screen specific resumes for entry level roles, for
Mm,
instance. Maybe not in the aspect of executive roles, but entry level roles are having automation tools go through and search keywords to eradicate specific candidates. But as you continue to work through that pipeline and you're applying for 500K, a million plus salary job, I mean, there's much more that goes into it when it comes to qualifications. But on the aspect of, executives, and we can talk more about leadership, but from the premise of mental health, it's a start of the year. A lot of employees, a lot of employers are really cracking down on having more candid conversations with their employees about mental health and well-being. Has that been a concern for you? Have you had that opportunity with your employer?
I love this question. I was so happy when you wanted to talk about this topic. I've had my own personal issues with it. And I mean, maybe not issues, but it's helped me really take the time to reflect. And it's also, I think, made me more empathetic when someone is going through their own either anxiety or depression. On a personal level, I moved from the DC area. I was living on the East Coast my entire life and moved out to Denver, Colorado a little over a year ago. And just with that change from the East Coast of the hustle bustle has been really eye-opening how I'm just meeting a lot of folks out here who are not work focused like the East Coast. So that's been really eye-opening. But for all of us, I think it's really been interesting as we're coming up on the anniversary of 3 years with COVID still existing. It's January 2023, and it's definitely still, people are still getting it. I've just been reading a lot and seeing a lot about burnout. So yes, for me, working from home has been wonderful. It's been flexible, but I'm an extroverted person and it's been hard. We're on a Zoom right now and it's great that we can catch up. We're on different time zones, but it's still tiring. That screen time is really tiring and draining, and the lack of the in-person connection really can make a difference. So I'd say for me, and I've been really fascinated by my firm's work. So we actually get 3 free telehealth mental health sessions through work. So I took advantage of that last year. I also experienced my own level of burnout last April, and I asked my boss and I said, is there any sabbatical program that we know about that I could take advantage just to take a few weeks off and refresh and regroup? And we worked with HR and they actually had a 3 week sabbatical program. So I'd say all that to say is to really ask where you're working. Do they have any perks or benefits that maybe they're not talking about? Those were 2 free benefits that I took advantage and really made a difference. And for me, it's also been a real reevaluation. I mentioned the move about my values. So I think it'd be helpful for someone who may be experiencing burnout to really take an inventory of, what are your values? Is it work? And that's okay. That's fine. Or is it family? Is it skiing on the weekends, which a lot of people do here? Is it, I don't know, knitting? Just thinking about your values. And for me also, I've taken a lot of inventory around my authentic code, which is a couple of words that help me. Am I being challenged in my position? Am I growing in my position? Is the technology working? So really taking that time to take a step back from the day-to-day, writing down. For me, journaling has been a huge help to really understand and write out and debrief on what are my values and how can I incorporate those in my everyday life. For me, it's also taking walks. It's getting in the sun, doing yoga, again, journaling, meditating. I've also done. That's not going to work for everyone, but I think it's just really important to be mindful of your own mental health, because we still have to show up every day for our jobs. And I know I have a strong value of showing up the best that I can be. If I'm not incorporating those values in my everyday life, I won't be the best. And then a last piece, again, I could talk about this forever, but is setting boundaries. So that's a huge conversation. I think if you go on Instagram, you'll see tons of information about boundaries and people are really talking about it. For example, I had to set a boundary with a friend this week. I just felt that I was at capacity with them. And that's really protecting my own mental health, my own capacity, my own level and time and energy. So can you do that at work? Can you tell your boss, nope, I'm only working 9 to 5? I know, and not every job can do that. But again, I think that inventory of your values can really help you determine that.
Absolutely. And I love how you touched upon, that you're an extrovert, that you're very focused on letting people know exactly what your expectations are, what you can and what you can't do, which is fantastic at the forefront because a leader, looking at you, now you're a leader as well, but, when they're assessing people for hiring, for opportunities, they know, okay, this is what Adrienne can do. This is what she chooses not to do or what she can't do, I guess, in regards to just our own skill sets. But
Right.
for individuals that might be introverts, for instance, that might be hesitant to even express that they're going through a difficulty at home or a difficulty at work, what are some particular methods or things that you have experienced throughout your career that might be a resource to them? Because we both know depression is something that many employees at some point or another experience, but they're very hesitant to express that with their employer for fear of feeling weak or being viewed as being weak and incapable. I mean, sometimes there's been stories in the past that individuals have shared, personal occurrences that have happened to them, and that has been used against them, when it comes to promotional opportunities. So I find that our conversations on mental health need to be destigmatized. But what would be some starting phases or maybe some points that you have seen has been successful for maybe someone that might be hesitant? Is it talking to a peer? Is it, writing a letter to, a leader within the organization?
We hope that you are enjoying this episode. Please provide in the comments section your thoughts and feedback. Let's jump back into this thought-provoking conversation.
What would be some starting phases or maybe some points that you have seen has been successful for maybe someone that might be hesitant? Is it talking to a peer? Is it, writing a letter to, a leader within the organization?
Such a great question. I honestly definitely have a blind spot about introverts, so I'll admit that. I will say that I had someone on my team this year who is a member of Gen Z. So the generation I'm in, I'm definitely a millennial, but I was just very empowered by him because he was very upfront about his mental health. I think it may be a little bit jarring for me at first because I have in my mindset that, can we talk about these things at work? I still think I have that just from my being raised by boomer parents. And that was always in my mind, like, don't speak up too much at work. But it was so refreshing when he came to me and said, hey, I'm struggling here. My mood's all over the place. I need some space. So that's the first thing I can think of, is that I think it's definitely, we're making progress and making waves because of the next generation, which is wonderful. I think I don't want to go too far away, but I think that once we have more Gen Z folks in leadership positions in Congress, we'll really continue to see those changes. But yes, I think that asking for help, and I totally understand, again, having experienced depression myself, it's really hard to do when you are so in your mindset and maybe so far along. But I think it is identifying maybe a person when you are in a good space. Okay, I have this great friend that I can go to. For me, I do voice notes, and it's hard to schedule times, Keenan, where, we were on a group message yesterday trying to figure out times to catch up with our friend, and everyone's so busy. Our schedules are tough. So for me, voice notes have been really helpful, where I just send a minute or two voice note and say, hey, this is what's going on in my life. It's a lot easier than a text sometimes. And I think it's again, identifying who is in your space. Is it a parent? Is it a sibling, a cousin, a good friend from another job, someone that you can maybe rely on, depend on when you are in that space? And I think it's, again, putting those practices in place earlier before you get too far. So again, looking at your values, looking at what works for you, maybe your coping mechanisms. I think for me earlier in my career, my quote unquote coping mechanisms were binging Netflix, which is fine sometimes, but I know that going on a long walk, calling a friend, meditating, or doing a workout is so much more beneficial than watching Emily in Paris again, and then also scrolling on my phone. So I think it's, again, identifying those practices, those coping mechanisms that will work for you. So when you do go through a rough time, which we all do, as you mentioned, especially in January, it's super cold and dreary, that you can hopefully prevent those times. So those are the things for me. I'm really empowered by this next generation. We're having frank conversations. I think we have to, with the results of the pandemic, the results of screen time, social media, and I'm hopeful that it'll be more apparent and just part of our everyday conversation going forward.
And I think that through this conversation and also the recent news of the passing of the gentleman that was part of the Ellen DeGeneres show, Twitch Stephen Boss, I think that has brought a lot of additional conversations about mental health, because here we have a gentleman that was not expressing any particular issues of pain or seeing any particular therapist that we know or that has been documented, that's been shared by the media, and yet he took his own life. So going through the frenzy of trying to figure out more about the situation, I think as leaders, as you and I both know, that having these conversations, it might not necessarily have to be on a day-to-day basis, but a month per month check-in doesn't have to be so explicit, but even just sending out a survey, how are you doing? 1 to 10, 10 being I'm feeling great, 1 being, hey, I'm not doing so well. And then maybe dissecting that and just maybe touching those key individuals and really kind of understanding what they're going through, because it's really a difficult situation to be in as a leader when someone on your team is not giving 110% or giving 100% even, because they're just going through a lot at home. So having those key conversations, really checking in on your employees, checking in on your team members, teammates, and just understanding, everyone's going through something. No one's perfect, of course, but it's important that as we work with diligence and we work with sympathy. You might not understand what people are going through, but it's good to listen. I think that that's something that I want to get your opinion on, Adrienne, is, how can executives, leaders of companies listen better? Because, we as leaders within our own organizations have decided that we're overseeing groups and we have our own agenda, we have our own objectives. But how do we get to that state where we can be more sympathetic, listen more, and be more intentional about establishing those types of connections?
Another great question. I hope that also goes to, it makes me think about training in general for leaders. So I hope as we're continuing to have these conversations, that is part of being a leader holistically. So yes, what are your listening skills? What are your communication skills? I actually do ask that in reference calls. So when we're about to give an offer, that is a question I usually ask. What is this person's communication skills like? What is their ability to listen? I think, unfortunately, in our distracted world where we have things coming through at all times, I just got out of my Outlook because I didn't want anything to come up. There's always something. We were talking about the news before we jumped on this call. There's so much information, so much to keep up with, that it's frankly distracting. And people, I think, really struggle to listen. So I'd say for me, if I'm going into a call or a meeting, I turn my phone on Do Not Disturb. Like I mentioned, I took out my Outlook, so I'm not distracted by notifications or things coming up. So that really helps my presence. I'd also say it's if there's any trainings that you can attend or any personality tests that may be helpful for you. So for example, I know my MBTI, I know my Enneagram, I know my DISC, which is really use for conflict resolution, but knowing where my strengths are. So for example, my MBTI, it shows that I'm really empathetic, and I lean into that. So now knowing that I'm an empathetic person, that's something that I'm going to keep in mind and know that that's something I can utilize when I'm in a tough conversation. So I think it's first knowing a lot about yourself, which can really help with the other pieces as well. Minimizing the distractions. Again, we can't help how many distractions there are, but I think meditation really helps with that. So it helps with presence. I also heard a friend, which I really love this the other day, say trying new things really helps with presence, because you have to concentrate so much on the new thing and you're nervous and you're scared, and it really helps with presence and putting you in your own space. So I think that goes also into your mental health and your well-being. What are you doing on your outside life? Are you going to these crazy parties, which is fine? Or are you going to more present, calming events? Are you exercising to help remove the burnout? So I think it's really the holistic view. It's not just our Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but what are you doing outside of those hours to really refresh yourself, remove burnout, and remove distractions so you can be really present when someone's having a tough conversation. But I'd say it's a work in progress. I also really love feedback. I know that's really hard for a lot of folks, and it takes practice. One of the great things about my master's program is that we practice feedback a lot. So after every single project, our group, whatever group you were in, we had to go around and give each other feedback. And that was so eye-opening, because it tells you, how did it land? How did this land on someone? Did I say something that didn't sit well with that person? Do I have a blind spot or habit that I don't even know I'm doing, but it didn't land well on that person? So I think that also helped. Like you mentioned, the surveys. I think feedback in general is such a gift. The time has to be right. It can't just be out of nowhere. And I always ask someone, are you open to feedback before I give it? But I think that's been really helpful for me and helped with presence as well.
Fantastic. Are there any last remarks or any comments that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really been an ongoing journey. So I'm 35 and a half, and I am, I guess, about 13 years into my professional career, and I'm still learning and growing every single day. I think that's what's the most fascinating part of a career trajectory, career journey. Yes, I've been in recruiting for a while, but I could change that, and I still have a lot of left of my career. But I think it's taking the time, using your tools, using your resources. Like I mentioned, my firm offers a lot of benefits for the mental well-being. Take advantage of those. I know that we're all busy, and for example, we have every once in a while, we'll have a 15-20 minute meditation break. Put that on your calendar and make sure you show up. I think that even taking 15 minutes out of your day can really make a difference overall. And as I mentioned, the values and things that are really important to me can change over time, and that's okay as well. We're all work in progress. But remember and try to put yourself in other people's shoes of, like you said, what people are going through, especially still with COVID being a thing. The economy's all over the place. The news is always wild. So take care of yourself, and that'll really help you take care of other people as well at the end of the day.
Well, thank you, Adrienne, for being on the Omega Expert Chat.
Thank you for having me. Really great opportunity. I appreciate it.